Welcome back, all. I am here today to break down the Wednesday EU Masters slate on DraftKings. A lot of League of Legends splits for the spring are winding down right now, but luckily we do have 4 more days of the EU Masters group stage from Wednesday through Saturday of this week. That being said, things are a little different this week as compared to last week. And that's because each group of 4 teams is going to finish the remainder of their matches in one day. So we're going to have 4 teams every day playing 3 games. It's kind of a bummer because DK decided against a full 6 game slate, and instead they're going to do 3 2 game slates. Not ideal, but I think there are some potential angles to exploit here potentially in the later matches as things kind of change, and you could see some teams that maybe already qualified or other teams that have nothing to play for. So without further ado, let's dive in. Uh, this is the schedule for Wednesday. Let's actually start with the group here. It's Group B. There you can just kind of see the standings thus far. Um, Rogue still has a shot here, but they're going to probably need to win their first match against LDLC, and then Diffuse Kids, they're basically out of it unless they can pull 3 wins out of nowhere. But even then, that might not be enough. So here's the schedule for Wednesday. One notable thing is that both LDLC and Rogue have back-to-back games. 1 and 2, LDLC has back-to-backs, and then at 3 and 4, Rogue's got back-to-backs. At first, I thought this actually might be a disadvantage for the team playing 2 matches in a row. But after having talked to some people who know a thing or two about League of Legends, they tend to think that the team that just played actually might have a slight advantage because they'll be warmed up, and if you've ever played video games, that definitely makes sense. I don't think there's any need to put huge stock into that, though. It's probably factored into the line anyway, so I'd only consider that if it was a true 50-50 coin toss match, but I don't think any of these matches are going to fit the bill for that on this Wednesday slate. All right, so let's dive in. Over here, I've got all the stats through the first 3 games for this group. This is kills per game, this is deaths per game, this is kills plus deaths per game. That kind of gives us an idea of team pace. As you can see, Vodafone and LDLC have a really nice pace. Diffuse Kids is super slow. If you even played their opponents who easily beat them last week, it didn't matter. Those matches were just too slow, not enough kills. This year's Towers, 1 per game, Towers loss per game, and then Dragons per game. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what these teams are able to do, in terms of the objectives in the match. All right, moving over here, I've got each slate broken down. So let's start with the first slate that kicks off at 12. We've got a game of Vodafone against DK. Vodafone's got about an 84% implied chance to win that match, so they're huge favorites. And then the LDLC and Rogue game is pretty interesting. LDLC a slight favorite there, but it's, like I mentioned last time, when you see a line that close in League of Legends, I just treat it as a coin flip. So, I think Vodafone should easily take care of DK there. And then obviously the LDLC and Rogue game is a close one. Rogue really needs that head-to-head win there against LDLC if they want to have any chance of going through. And just to quickly run through this side here, this is their implied win percentage that I got from the lines that were set by Bovada. This is the implied total for the match. This is expected combined kills. That is an average of each team's pace from over here. So as you can see, this actually aligns pretty nicely with the totals in the matches. And then this column here is the implied kill total per team. Uh, and so, like for example, here you can see that even though Vodafone is in the lower total match, they actually have the highest team total, and that's just because DK's is so low. And then finally, stack is just the average cost of stacking that team. All right, so let's dive into this, and I'll start with a few just kind of notes on any of these slates that are going to apply. DK's pricing is primarily based on how highly favored a team is, right? So I think one way you have to look at finding value with League of Legends is in the teams that aren't highly as favored, but do have high potential for a high number of kills. For that very reason, um, if you stack the two teams that are implied to win on these 2 game slates, that's going to be super chalky. Probably fine for cash. But even then, you could be in a situation where if you don't put the right guy in the captain spot, or you just flip the top and sup from the two teams, you could be in trouble if everybody else is, or if half of the field is on the reverse of that in the same match. In GPP, you're not going to take down anything big alone if you stack the two favorites. You're likely to just split with a ton of people, even if it ends up being optimal. So for that reason, I think there is a ton of merit on these 2 game slates and in trying to build a unique roster, whether that's like a 3-2-2 build or, one favorite and one of the dogs or even a game stack. So just a few things to keep in mind there. All right, let's move down to this first slate. Um, oh yeah, one other thing that I think is probably important to consider is that all these teams have a history. They just played each other last week, so I think you should expect a ton of people to just go back and look at how the match went in the reverse fixture, so to speak, and they're probably going to build their lineups off of that. So I think again that information you can use to your advantage if you are playing in a large field tournament. Um, these matches aren't going to play out exactly like they did last week, so there's a ton of potential leverage in kind of taking a different approach as to how these matches might play out. And kind of to that point, um, here's something interesting I noticed. So Diffuse Kids, who I mentioned, were playing super slow, combined kills and deaths of only 17 a game, right? Well, if we look at their trend, that number went from 10 to 15 to 25 in the third match. Funny because a similar thing happened with Rogue. Their combined kills plus deaths went from 10 to 20 to 40 in the last match. Now that is somewhat opponent based, but I also think it probably has something to do with the fact that DK and Rogue thought they, would come out in the beginning of this tournament and play pretty slow, and try to not get in a ton of team fights and go for their objectives, and they figured they might be able to win like that. Well, I think they probably realized that wasn't working out very well for them, and they had no choice but to start to change their tactics, which did lead to bloodier matches towards the end of that first 3 game split. So I think the point I'm trying to make there is that I think Diffuse and Rogue, they might have to get more aggressive because they need to come out with wins probably in this first match for both of them. And that could play right into the hands of Vodafone and LDLC, who already like to play at a high pace. So um, the idea is that certainly these kills could be, the kill totals in these matches could be significantly higher than we saw in the reverse fixtures. So just something to keep in mind there. As far as potential stacks in this first slate, The Vodafone LDLC stack it's going to be super chalky because they're both favorites here. Um, in order to do that, you are going to have to captain a top or sup, but on a two-game slate, I have no problem with that because the top or sup from these favored teams could easily outscore the ADC or mid from the dogs in these matchups. So no problem with doing that. But again, I think that's going to be a high ownership lineup, so you're not going to be very well differentiated, especially if it's large field. Um, Other stacks to look at, I think there's merit in the LDLC game stack. Um, or one way to differentiate a bit would be to take Vodafone with Rogue, who does need to win this match and might come out more aggressively here. All right, so that's the first slate. Uh, the second slate has a big matchup of Vodafone and LDLC, and then Rogue and DK. Again, we've got a clear favorite in Vodafone in the first match and a clear favorite in Rogue in the second match. This one is really interesting because if we look at the implied totals for the matches, we're going to see that the Rogue DK game has a higher total uh, than the Vodafone LDLC match. Now, that doesn't make any sense at first glance because we're talking about Vodafone and LDLC who are at the top in terms of pace here, and then Rogue and Diffuse who are much slower. So, what's going on there? Well, one possibility is that by the time we get to these matches, if both Vodafone and LDLC won the earlier matches, Rogue and DK could effectively be unable to move on to the next round. So, what does that mean? We could see a fiesta. If you've never heard the term before, I hadn't heard it until a few weeks ago. Basically, it's just a match where both of the teams don't have anything to play for anymore, and so it just, they pick weird champions, and it just kind of turns into a bloodbath. So that's the only explanation I can see for Pinnacle setting that total higher in the Rogue DK match. So that is something, I don't know if that's something I would trust in cash, but that's definitely an angle to look at in GPP for this second slate. In terms of the Vodafone LDLC match on that second slate, um, even if they both qualified, I believe LDLC could still overtake Vodafone there for the top seed if they won. So for that reason, there could be something to play for there. Um, in terms of potential stacks on that slate, I think the Vodafone Rogue stack is going to be super chalky because those are the two favorite teams. You can fit that stack with a jungler at captain, which is still pretty solid. And then if you want to differentiate, I just like game stacking both. If that Rogue DK game does end up being a fiesta, that could win it for you if you stack that game. On the same token, if it's we're still talking about Rogue and DK, two teams that have played super slow thus far. So, you know, sure it's possible they have a fiesta and it goes nuts, but I think it's somewhat likely that it's a very boring and slow game, even still with nothing to play for. And in that case, then the other match you have Vodafone and LDLC who are both super high pace. So I think even the losing team there, which is probably LDLC, they're still going to have a lot of kills. So you can easily stack that game in GPP too if you want to go that way. And one more thing, actually, before we move on, it's like you look at this Rogue DK game, and the first time they met, it was 7-3. I mean, terrible for DFS. And then now you're looking at almost a 29 implied kill total. So that to me says that there's definite potential for the Fiesta there. So keep that in mind. All right, finally, Slate 3. Uh, we've got Vodafone and Rogue, and then we've got LDLC and DK. Vodafone and LDLC are the big favorites here. Stacking them will be chalk, but I fully expect that by the time this slate starts, and this is something that you'll want to keep an eye on. You know, the way the earlier matches play out could definitely impact the way you want to build for this final slate. I don't think there's going to be anything to play for at that point. So, you know, it's really going to be up in the air what happens in both of these matches. You know, if we're just looking at the stats, the Vodafone road game should be the higher kill game, but you know, we could see a Fiesta in either match here, so there's no reason the LDLC DK game couldn't blow up as well. Um, Again, uh, not to beat a dead horse here, but I think you can game stack either game there, and that could turn out well for you in GPP. Um, the Vodafone LDLC stack is going to be super chalky. And again, it's going to require a top or a sup as captain. Um, the only, you know, while I didn't think that was a huge problem in this first slate because there's still stuff on the line, that may not cut it on this final slate just because if both matches are Fiestas, you're probably going to want two ADCs or mids or junglers. But um, it is a build you can fit. So that covers the slate. I think the biggest thing here is if you're going to play the second or third slate on this day, you just need to keep a close eye on the way the matches go earlier in the day and kind of see what each team's implications are as far as advancing to the next round. Always keep in mind that if a team's got nothing to play for, a fiesta is always possible. So, you know, it's on these two game slates. There's going to be a ton of chalk, and so there's a lot of potential leverage and just trying to be a little different. So, like I said, it could be a game stack. It could be a 3-2-2 or a 3-2-1-1. Whatever you need to do to kind of get off the beaten path, so to speak. Uh, but with that said, good luck to everybody out there on Wednesday, and I will be back for a breakdown on Thursday as well.